On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks have their 3-game winning streak snapped at home against the Utah Jazz in a back-and-forth game that they were not able to pull out of the fire thanks to some struggles from the bench, as well as from Trae Young, and honestly, a pretty impressive showing from the Utah Jazz, who are quite good this season to start things off in 2022-23. We'll have full coverage of the game and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1345 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening, November 9th. Today's podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find a qualified candidate you want to talk to, and they help you to do it faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. And I also want to thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out across podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and on YouTube on the video side. And today's show is going to be myself diving in to what became a 125-119 home loss for the Hawks at the hands of the Utah Jazz. Before the season started, I would have told you this was going to be a very bad result for the Hawks against a Utah team that was projected widely to be rebuilding this season. But in better context now, the Jazz are 10-3 on the season, so a little bit less of a disaster that you might imagine. This game wasn't quite as bad as that home loss to Charlotte or the embarrassing blowout loss at the hands of the Toronto Raptors, but still the Hawks were in position to win this one at different points, especially in the second half, leading by as many as 10 points, and in the fourth quarter bit them a 40-29 margin in the fourth quarter, and the winning streak that the Hawks had up to 3 games is now over. They fall to 7-4 on the season so far, still in perfectly fine shape at this stage, but they lost 3 out of the 4 quarters in this game. They were behind the 8 ball for, I would say, most of the night, not the entire way, but certainly the majority of the evening, and they were not able to sort of close the deal because in large part, the bench really struggled. Trae Young really struggled, and that's kind of the context that I want to get through. And at the top of the podcast, and kind of dive back in now to what transpired. So if you are a new listener, first of all, welcome aboard, and I appreciate all of your listening at this stage, as well as please subscribe to the podcast if you enjoy what you hear or watch on this show. But basically, if you're a new listener, what we do on the show after games is going into the pregame context, kind of putting it all in play, how the game flow went, and then also some broad takeaways from the game itself, the stats, all of the analysis that you're looking for, as well as some player takeaways at the end of the podcast. So as I kind of mentioned briefly, Utah has been stunningly good to open the season. I argued preseason they'd be actually pretty competent until they started really selling off parts for their rebuild. But even I, who was pretty reasonably high on the Jazz in their current form, they've been much better than I thought they were going to be this year. They were 9-3 coming in, the top 3 offense in the league, and a bunch of competent veteran players. They're also well coached, I think, by Will Hardy in his first season. So this is not a disastrous loss on paper, but still you're at home and you were favored in the game if you're the Hawks. Trae Young returned in this one. He was listed as questionable after missing the game on Monday. And for what it's worth, Nate McMillan said after the game that Trae was a little bit winded during the game. He was sort of attributing that to the fact that he was not able to really do any sort of training the last couple of days because of the leg injury that he's been battling. So maybe some context there, but Trae came back and only Bogdanovich was out for the Hawks in this game. Utah was also healthy, which is also worth keeping in mind here for context, but the Hawks were favored. Our friends at BetOnline made the Hawks a 3.5-point favorite in the morning, and by the time this game tipped off with Trae in the lineup, the Hawks were favored by 5 or 5.5 points. So not a huge spread, but certainly the market viewed the Hawks as the better team, at least at home in this spot on a regular rest situation, and Utah upended that in a big way. So we'll get into the game flow now, but certainly, again, broadly speaking, not a disaster, but not a great result either for this Hawks team that you probably, quote unquote, should have won this game at home. Early going, the big story in the first quarter was the free throw shooting from the Utah Jazz. So on defense, after a sort of a pseudo lob from Trae Young to Capella for the first bucket with his left hand of the night, Lauri Markkanen, who's having a great season, by the way, for the Jazz. I've always kind of liked Lauri, but not like this. He's been really, really good for them. He drew 3 fouls in the first 4 possessions. He took 6 free throws in the first 110 seconds of the game. And as a team, the Jazz took 11 free throw attempts in the first 4.5 minutes of the game. That is a huge number for that small period of time. Now, on the bright side, it kind of slowed from there. In fact, the Jazz, quote unquote, only took 24 attempts in the game, which is a little bit more than you would think. But after 11 in the first 4 minutes, that's a pretty acceptable result. But Utah was winning this game for about 4 minutes without making a single field goal. The Hawks did actually quite well against Milwaukee in preventing free throws, and they did pretty well again in the last 3.5 quarters. That first 5 minutes was kind of a rough one in a big way. There was 2 fouls on John Collins, which I think maybe explains part of why he played a little bit less. But one of the reasons why I argue against kind of auto-fouling out players is that John Collins finished with 2 fouls. He had 2 fouls in the first 3 minutes, finished with 2 fouls. So not really a reason to take him out of the game, but they did that at that point in time. Rotationally, it was interesting. It was kind of similar to what the Hawks have been doing for a while now with one small tweak. It was Justin Holiday, it was Jalen Johnson, it was Okongwu, and Aaron Holiday all played in the first and third quarters. AJ Griffin appeared to start the second and start the fourth. So there was a little bit of a thought that the Hawks may not use Griffin in this game. That would not have been going over well with the Hawks fans. I know that. But they did try to have him out there in both halves. That was a list of more of a solid role for AJ after his breakout performance on Monday. So it was a 10-man group the Hawks played in this one. Utah had their first run of the game, sort of a 7-0 run mid-quarter in the first, go up by 9 points. The Jazz were 4-12 from the floor, but up by 9 because they made a couple of threes. And again, the free throw shooting was certainly dynamic for the Jazz. The Hawks showed by as many as 11 in the first quarter. And at one point, Lauri Markkanen had 16 points. And the Hawks had 15 points. So he was outscoring them for 10 minutes in this game. 15 points in almost 11 minutes for the Hawks. That's a really, really rough offensive start. They were 7 of 24 from the floor and 0 of 4 from 3 at the outset. Trae Young missed 8 of his first 9 shots. He had a bad night offensively by his standards in this one. There were some jump shots strung together at the end of the quarter from Justin Holiday, from Okongwu, and then from Trae for the final 7 points of the quarter. And the Hawks were down by only 4 points at the end of the first quarter. They had an 85 offensive rating in the first with 10 of 29 from the floor. That was a rough one. As I said before, the Hawks lost 3 of the 4 quarters in this game. They actually played pretty well defensively in that first quarter. The Jazz only really used the free throw line to their advantage, but the things definitely leveled off from there for the defense in this game. Elsewhere, the rest of the first half was kind of owned by Utah for the most part. The Jazz had a 12-2 run early in the second quarter to go back up by 12 points. Justin Holiday had a couple of big plays, hit a 3, had a nice closeout that he sort of turned into a run-out dunk, but he was probably the only small bright spot for that Murray plus bench unit, which has actually been pretty good so far. Coming in the night, I actually tweeted this during the day on Wednesday. The Hawks have been very, very good with both Trae Young and DeJounte Murray on the floor. They have been pretty good with DeJounte and no Trae, and they have been disastrous with Trae and no DeJounte this year so far. It's obviously a small sample size. In this game, the Murray, no Trae minutes really, really, really cratered, and the bench units were really bad for the Hawks. The bench has been kind of hit and miss, and by the way, of course, famously, if you watched the game on Monday, the bench was probably the number one reason why the Hawks won that game, headlined by Griffin and Johnson, et cetera, and Okongwu, but they were really bad in this one. So it was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing compared to Monday night. The Hawks were down by 15 points in the second quarter. The Jazz had 24 points in the first 6 minutes of the second quarter. They had made 9 of 14 from the floor in that period of time. The only shot by AJ Griffin that was made in the first half was a 3 to stop the bleeding, but even he was only 1 of 4 from the floor, and the Hawks got smoked in those minutes. It was minus 10 in 6 minutes from that bench unit. Later in the first half, Trae Young took a really bad shot with 3 minutes to go. That was kind of one of those head scratchers with no rhythm. Trae has the ultimate green light, and I definitely want to stress that. I think there's been a lot of panic about Trae that I don't share, and we'll come back to that later on in the podcast. But he was bad in this game, let's just say, and he took a pretty bade shot there. He was 2 of 10, no rhythm at all. Took a contested pull-up 3. That was a tough one. Of course, right after that, he threw this gorgeous 50-foot pass to DeAndre Hunter for a 3-point play. But if you're picking on Trae's shot selection, that was maybe Exhibit A in this contest. The Hawks were down by 12 with 2 minutes to go. Got it down to 6 briefly at the end of the first half, but then a 3 by Kelly Olynyk gave the Jazz a 9-point lead at the break. And offensively, it was pretty rough in the first half. They had a 104 offensive rating, only took 13 3-point attempts in the first half. That's not enough. 5 free throw attempts. Both of those numbers were too low the entire game, in my opinion. They did have 15 assists in the first half, which is pretty good. DeJounte Murray had 11 points. Holiday had 10. Trae found it a little bit at the end of the quarter, and then the second quarter, where he was still only 3 of 14 in the first half of the game. And again, the Murray minutes, minus 15 for DeJounte in that first half. Not really his fault. It was just the bench units were really soundly outplayed. And then defensively, it was pretty rough all the way around. I thought the Hawks were really good in the third quarter, which we'll get to in a second. But especially in the first half, I thought even the bigs were not very good for the Hawks, like Okongwu, Capella, Even Collins was not quite his best at the rim. And then point of attack stuff was really kind of a mess in the early going. Plus the foul was early. The Jazz actually missed a bunch of shots from floater range, or it might have been worse. Utah had a 114 offensive rating in the half court. So basically, just to make it simple, the half court, you're usually a lot worse because, basically transitions your high leverage spots as an offense. So for the Jazz to have a 114 offensive rating, which is already above league average for it overall, since having that in half court is like super duper elite, and the Hawks had trouble getting stops. Utah made 6 more threes and 11 more free throws than the Hawks did in that first half. And that's a bad recipe for Atlanta. We'll come back to what happened in the third. And by the way, the second half of this game was basically the ultimate positive in the third, negative in the fourth. And that was kind of a flat result overall. But when the Hawks went into the break losing, they had to win the second half, and they did not do that. So at least not in decisive fashion. But we'll get into all that stuff and more coming up. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn, and these days, every potential hire is a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team. They do it faster, and they do it for free. I've had to hire a few times in the last few years, and LinkedIn Jobs has proven to be an awesome resource across the board. It's incredibly easy to create a free job post at LinkedIn Jobs, and they have high-quality candidates that you need to locate to make the best possible hire. Then once you're set up, you can add your job in the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're actually hiring. LinkedIn Jobs has simple tools like screening questions to make it easy. Focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience you can quickly prioritize. You actually want to interview and eventually hire. You want to finish the year strong, and finding a new team member that is up to your standards is key piece of doing just that. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires against leading competitors, and they help you find the best candidates that you want to talk to, and they help you to do it faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, and right out of the halftime break was the biggest haymaker of the night at that point for Atlanta, a 14-5 run to immediately tie the game. Threes from John Collins and Trae Young. Clint Capella was a man possessed in the third quarter. He had 6 points and 5 rebounds in less than 3 minutes to open the third, and he had 16 rebounds in his first 16 minutes of play. He was really, really good. He took a charge. He had a block shot. He was really flying around. And offensively, the Hawks scored in their first 10 possessions of the second half. That's one heck of a run to go from basically down 9 to up 6 by the middle of the third quarter. Murray carved up Kelly Olynyk on a switch and finished that with a pretty fancy layup at the rim. It was a very smooth play from him. And overall, it was a 32-13 run from Atlanta to go up 86-76. The Hawks were 14-20 from the floor at that point with 6 offensive rebounds. So in that entire stretch, the Hawks only had 1 empty possession. And it was in the first 8 minutes. So basically, 8-minute stretch, the Hawks scored on every possession other than one that was a turnover. So it was really excellent work, and they reached a lot of high highs in this game. That was really their only time in the whole game when they really were dominant, but they were dominant for a while. The rotation, though, got a little bit tweaked because the Hawks played their starters that entire time because they had been rolling, and they wanted to let that roll. But then the bench unit came in, and as I said before, the bench unit really struggled in this game. It was pretty ugly stuff. A 9-0 run immediately when the bench came in alongside Trae Young. Not a Hawks thing, but I wanted to mention this as a guy I talked about a lot over the summer during the draft stuff. Walker Kessler, the rookie center from the Jazz, who's actually a local product to the Atlanta area, made a fantastic block and then sprinted full court, beating everybody down the floor for a dunk. He was really good in this game for the Jazz. Just wanted to at least flag that as a basketball observer. But Trae scored the last 4 points of the third quarter when he kind of needed that, honestly. But the Hawks, were still in rough shape at times when he was not having his own strengths in this game. But even with that huge run, the Hawks only won in the third quarter by 14 points. Now, they should have won it by probably more than that, and I guess that mattered at the end of the day because the Hawks were up by 5 going into the fourth quarter, and it wasn't enough. Again, I don't want to restate it and overstate it, but the bench units did not work in this contest. It was a 10-2 run to open the fourth quarter by the Jazz. A big swing in the middle of that was that Jalen Johnson had a catchable lob that he could have finished, wasn't able to quite do that, and then Utah hit a three on the other end of the floor to take the lead. That was a big swing. The Hawks trailed really the entire way after that. They were 1 of 7. They were 1 of 7 from the floor with a turnover to start the fourth quarter. And at that point in the game, I think it was almost the case the entire way through. But AJ Griffin, Jalen Johnson, Justin Holiday, and Onyeka Okongwu were all minus 18 or worse at that point in the game. So, like, that's not to say that any of those individual guys were just terrible on their own, but that unit just did not work in this game. No matter whether it was Trae or DeJounte with them, it just was not functioning. They came back with Collins and Hunter after that stoppage. Just probably waited a little bit too long. In fact, they waited way too long for Capella to come back in. That I did not understand. I thought Capella had pretty violently outplayed Kongwu to that point. And Capella was so good in the third quarter that they waited probably 3 minutes too long to bring him back in the game. But no matter what happened, the Jazz kind of opened it up a little bit from there with an 8-0 run. Trae and Murray both missed shots near the rim in the middle of 3 straight buckets from the Jazz. And that really kind of flipped the game in a lot of different ways. So after a timeout, Trae did have his best stretch of the game offensively. He had 7 points in a row to kind of paper over some of his struggles a little bit and improve his efficiency in the game. But also defensively, Mike Conley went by him twice in a row, like he wasn't even standing there. It was a rough one from Trae. Hunter had a nice stretch at the end of the game offensively. He scored, I believe, 7 points in about a minute or so to get things pretty interestingly. The Hawks just couldn't get the stops that they needed to chip away. They finally got 2 in a row that kind of really opened the door a little bit for a comeback, but they couldn't get the third stop in a row. They got it to like 4 or 5 points, 6 points a couple times. It just wasn't able to go all the way across that. And then Utah scored back-to-back times to go up by 7. Murray did hit a pull-up 3 to make it interesting, to get them back within 4 with like 30-ish seconds to go. But the Jazz didn't make the mistake that you kind of have to make in order to come back from that level of deficit. And Utah kind of just ran the clock out. In the fourth quarter, by the way, the Jazz were 14 of 26 from the floor and 7 of 13 from 3. That's a huge X factor. The Hawks did actually play fairly well on offense in the fourth quarter. They were 29 points on solid efficiency. I will say this, though. The bench, one more time, was 0-6 from the floor with no points in the fourth quarter. But Nick McMillan, after the game, talked about the lack of stops in the fourth quarter. He was right about that. It was not always pretty. Now, credit to Utah. That's a very good offensive team that's playing very well, and they shot it really well. But the Hawks did have some breakdowns, especially in chemo. They just could not get enough stops in that fourth quarter. So we'll get into all the takeaways now, but it was a maddening kind of roller coaster kind of game where the third quarter was just one thing. And I say the third quarter was really like the first 8 minutes of the third quarter. The rest of the game, the Hawks were not the better team. Utah was a better team in this one. Offensively, on the whole, for the entire game, the numbers look just fine. In fact, they look pretty good. A 115 offensive rating in the game. Utah's personnel defensively is not too good, but they haven't been fouling at all. And the Hawks only got 11 free throw attempts in the game. I saw some people asking me after the game about the free throw disparity and the attempts. Like early in the game, obviously Utah was getting in the line a ton, but they weren't like terrible calls. Just the Hawks just kind of were over pursuing a little bit. And in general, it's been a theme all year long. The Hawks have not gotten to the free throw line. Even Trae, by the way, did not get to the line in this game. Did not take a free throw. And if Trae's not taking free throws, the Hawks are not going to take free throws because everybody else on the team is either middling or bad at creating free throw attempts, and the Hawks only got 11 of them. They shot pretty well on twos, but only 29% from 3. All 5 starters were at least productive, 15 points or more for all 5 of them, but the bench was essentially almost a 0 on offense. Justin Holiday had 10 points in about 1 quarter of span. But Aaron Holiday, 2 points. Jalen Johnson, 0 of 5 from the floor. AJ Griffin, 1 of 5 from the floor. Kongwu, a pretty quiet night with only 4 points. So the bench was kind of just non-existent to go along with fairly decent production from the starters on offense. Defensively, it was not good on the whole. I will say this. The third quarter showed the capability of being good, and the starters were much better than the bench was in this game. Just the most shining example of this, John Collins was plus 19 in a 6-point loss. So that tells you they were minus 25 with Collins off the floor in the game. They had a 120 defensive rating, though. Even when you factor in Utah having a good offense, they do have a good offense. That's too much at home in particular. They got the fouls under control after the first few minutes of the game, but they shot the heck out of them from 3. The Jazz were 17 of 39 from 3. And again, I mentioned it at the end of the first half, but the Hawks made 9 fewer threes than the Jazz, and they made 11 fewer free throw attempts. And you're not going to win if those are your numbers. And those on the margins, by the way, the Jazz also had more assists than the Hawks did in the game. So all kinds of issues. The Hawks did win the glass. That's encouraging on some level, but not by a ton, and not quite enough to kind of overcome all the other messes that were happening from the Hawks. So, big picture, again, we'll get into the individual players in a moment, but this was not a fantastic performance. I think the bench was certainly to blame for the majority of it, but John Collins didn't play enough, I didn't think. The stars were not great necessarily. In fact, I do think that between Collins, Hunter, Capella, and Murray, they all played either average or better basketball. Trae was not good, as we'll come back to in a second. But Just man for man, Utah just outplayed them, and they had no answer for Lauri Markkanen in this game. Jordan Clarkson was pretty good for the Jazz, and a couple of big shots down the stretch, and they go on the road and get a win. So we'll come back to it in a second with some individual breakdowns. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. Basketball is in full swing now in November. BetOnline is the number one source for the information, the trends, the stats, the news, and analysis they're looking for this season. You can find all the latest odds and trends for every professional and college league out there at BetOnline. That includes the latest, not only in basketball, but also in football and soccer and esports and golf, tennis, auto racing, horse racing, all of that and more at BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your sports betting fix. If you love podcasts about sports as well, you can find all of that at BetOnline. BetOnline has the up-to-date futures on the NBA as well as live odds. They have all the stuff that you want to see: pregame, totals, money lines, spreads, all that fun stuff. Check it all out at BetOnline on your mobile device or computer to learn more about all of the trends and the action across the sports world today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, and the players who appeared in this one, only 10 for the Hawks. No garbage time to speak of. It was a tie for the fewest minutes between Aaron Holiday and AJ Griffin, which is not a huge surprise. Those guys basically split the 9th, 10th man minutes in this one. And I've said this a few times now, but I will say it one more time. I do believe that if the Hawks are going to play AJ Griffin more in a non-bogey universe, those minutes are going to come from Aaron Holiday and not Justin Holiday, if I had to guess. Now, it might be some of Justin as well, but I think that Aaron is the guy that they would replace with a little bit more on it. That was definitely the case here. It was Aaron's spot in the rotation that AJ kind of took for 10 minutes in this spot. Aaron was quiet in this one. He was the best bench player by plus minus because he was playing with the starters. He came in a little bit earlier and a couple of, I think in both halves actually, but had 2 assists, 2 points. He was just kind of okay. Didn't do anything great or bad. AJ came back to earth after his performance on Monday. That was always going to happen. He was 1 of 4 from 3 in this one. Some decent looks. I'm not worried about AJ Griffin shooting in any way, shape, or form. 3 rebounds. It was minus 18 in 10 minutes. That was just kind of he's going to have some of those nights. He's 19 years old. No concerns there for me. Jalen Johnson struggled on offense. He was 0-5 from the floor, 0-4 on twos, 0-1 from 3. No points, minus 22, a game worst number there for him. Did have 5 rebounds, they had a block and a steal. And I think his flashes on defense have been actually pretty encouraging. Now, it's not every play, and his off-ball stuff is a bit of an adventure. But when he is dialed in, he has some pretty athletic and pretty highlight popping defensive plays. The rest of the package is not necessarily fantastic right now, but there's that. Justin Holiday made shots in the first half and did not make them in the second half. That was kind of the Jekyll and Hyde of that. I will say this, even as someone who likes Justin Holiday, he took 2 very bad, very questionable shot attempts in the second half of this game that did not really help matters. He missed both of them. Did make 2 threes in the game, was 4 of 9 from the floor. Played fine on the whole, I thought, but those were 2 bad shots that he would probably want back at this point. And then Okongwu was very quiet. It wasn't like he was terrible by any means. He wasn't. But he was physically overwhelmed a few times by Walker Kessler. He had some issues early in the game with Olynyk when he was coming in the game as well. So not the best Okongwu game either after he was really, really, really good against Milwaukee on Monday. The starters, again, more positive. We'll save Trae for the very end. But the other 4 guys at least played solid enough basketball. Murray had 26 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. In fact, Murray has scored 20 points or more in 7 straight games. That's the second longest streak of his career per Hawks PR. So that's a pretty impressive stretch for him. He played 38 minutes. That's a lot of minutes for him, but he definitely was good again in this game, despite being minus 7. Those bench units, again, I don't want to blame Murray for them, but he was the only starter that was not in the positive because of those units. I thought Capella, especially in the second half, was very good. 15 points, 19 rebounds in 26 minutes, had 2 blocks. First half, he actually wasn't his best, I don't think, defensively. Like I'm always someone who will point out to you like he's better defensively than you might think. First half, not his best. Second half, third quarter in particular, was dominant. Only played 4 minutes in the fourth quarter. Didn't love that. I think the Hawks did not bring him in fast enough to kind of stop the bleeding on defense at times, but he was really good on the whole in this one. DeAndre Hunter had a nice flourish in the fourth quarter, kind of saved his numbers a little bit. 22 points, I believe at least 10 of them were in the fourth quarter. 9 of 15 from the floor, only 1 of 6 from 3 though, so he was 8 of 9 on twos. That's actually pretty encouraging for him. Got the line for 3 attempts. Familiar refrain though, no assists, 3 rebounds for Hunter. The supporting stuff, not always the best, but I thought he was okay in this one. And then John Collins just didn't play enough once again. But he was more productive, though, 15 points, only 8 shots, though. It's just not enough usage for him. I say it all the time, but it's just still the case. 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and I did not like at all that McMillan did not play him enough in this game. With Capella, It was more explainable in the fourth quarter, especially when he came back out of the game because they were trying to play small. They were losing. They were trying to score. But Collins playing 28 minutes in this game is kind of unacceptable for me with only 2 minutes. With only 2 fouls. Yes, they were early, but Collins was very obviously their best option at that spot, and he did not play enough. So when we say that out loud, plus 19 in a 6-point loss is kind of a wild one, to be sure. And then Trae Young. So Trae had some moments in the second half where he kind of found his scoring a little bit. But if you watch this game, you probably would recognize it. I hope he was quite bad. I tweeted that during the fourth, I think maybe early in the fourth quarter, and got some flack afterwards about him having 22 points, etc. Trae was bad in this game. He did make some shots late to kind of to help them have a comeback bid, and that's worth noting for sure. And finished with 22 points, 9 assists, 2 steals. But he was 8 of 23 on 2-point attempts in the game. That's a terrible number, obviously. He was 2 of 5 on threes, which is actually pretty good, but did not take a free throw. Defensively, he was very bad. Mike Conley, who I like quite a bit, I've always liked Mike Conley. Mike Conley at this point should not be blowing by you off the dribble. That was happening on a regular basis in this game from Trae. Not that it's a shock that Trae's going to struggle on defense, but it was, I thought, notably bad a few times along the way. And the big thing is, yes, he had a couple of days off. I know McMillan kind of gave him that pass to some extent about him being gassed, but the shooting numbers are pretty ugly. And I made it a point on Monday to say this on the show. Like, I am not concerned about Trae. There's like the whole better without Trae thing. I'm not going to do that again on this show, but if you missed it, listen to that podcast on Monday. But his shooting is off to a very, very rough start. Now, again, Trae and Murray playing together, the numbers have been great all year long. They had a plus 13-ish net rating coming into the night. I'm sure it did not go down much. They played well together in this game as well. So that pairing is working. And traditionally, Trae's been good no matter what happens. But for the season, I will just give you the numbers. After tonight, Trae is shooting 37.8% from the floor. That'd be a career low by a lot. 31% from 3. And that number is not terrible. And like, it's so early, I don't really worry about that one. But here's the big one. 41% on 2s for the season. Now, for context, the last 3 years, Trae has been shooting 50.2% from 2. That's not like incredible, but for a guy his size and his craft and his passing and all that stuff, it's a totally fine number. 41% on 2s is really bad. So I'm not panicking. There's no reason to panic. It's Trae Young. I said this during the game as well, but like, he has a 3-season track record of playing full seasons and being excellent, and for my money, being one of the 5 to 10 best players in the league on offense. So there's no real concern for me, but he has not been good. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Like, he has been bad by his standards, which are lofty. Again, by his standards, which are lofty. The counting stats are what they are. He's still averaging a lot of points and assists. So like, he's going to be able to do that almost no matter what, but the shooting efficiency has been a problem. And if you're wondering why the Trae plus bench units have been bad this year by the numbers, a lot of it's because of Trae. Now, the bench has been bad too at times, but Trae has not been his normal self and carrying those units as well. So we'll come back to it for sure in the coming days, maybe even tomorrow after the game. But a concerning number, if you want to circle one number that I probably have the most concern with, it's his 2-point shooting. Part of that is just like him missing floaters they usually make, so whatever. But 3-point shooting, a little bit more elastic. 2-point shooting, pretty bad through 10 games. 10 games for Trae, 11 for the team at this stage. So anyway, he was bad in this one. He was one of the reasons why they lost this game, and that's just part of the deal. It's going to happen over the course of 82 games, but we'll see if he bounces back on Thursday. Maybe has a little bit more wind, etc. Speaking of Thursday, the Hawks will not have too much time to draw up a response from this one. In fact, Nate McMillan said they want to flush it, was the word, that was the phrasing he used after the game, and they will not have time to kind of rest too much here. They actually have a home and home with Philadelphia. Now, the Sixers are not playing exceedingly well this season. That's worth noting. Also, James Harden has been banged up. He is out right now for Philadelphia. And as a result, people have kind of been saying, at least until maybe today, Philadelphia is maybe a soft matchup for the Hawks in some ways. Now, the Hawks do match up well with the Sixers. They always have. They beat them in that playoff series famously. They play drop coverage with Embiid. That's something that Trae feasts on. So no one needs to be like worried about this matchup. But the Sixers are still a good team. And this is a back-to-back for the Hawks. It's also a big rest disadvantage for Atlanta. Philadelphia last played on Monday. So they'll actually have 2 full days off, whereas the Hawks will be playing on the second night of the back-to-back. The home court is very helpful, of course. There's no travel in between games, but we'll see. And then, by the way, after this, the 2 teams go kind of with each other. On Friday, they travel to Philadelphia to play on Saturday. So this is 2 games in 3 nights against the Sixers. Philly is 5-6 this year. Embiid missed 4 of those games, but came back on Monday and looked pretty good like himself. They beat the Suns in impressive fashion. So Philadelphia is capable of being good. That Tyrese Maxey is a really good player as a primary scorer, etc. The Hawks do play well against the Sixers always, but we'll see how they fare in a turnaround spot just about 20 hours or so after they lost in pretty maddening fashion to the Jazz on this evening. So keep an eye on that one. We'll have a new podcast as we always do after the game on Thursday evening. One more time at the end of the podcast, I want to plead with you to subscribe to the show across platforms and download and click Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. Also spread the word about the podcast. If you know a Hawks fan, friend or two that do not have already access to the show, put it in front of them. I definitely appreciate all of that. Ratings, reviews, etc. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. We'll see you after the game on Thursday evening.